I've been a trucker for almost 10 years, and I've driven through just about every kind of weather, every kind of town, and down every kind of road. But nothing could have prepared me for that one night on the back roads of Nevada. It was a simple job: pick up a load in Reno and haul it down to Las Vegas. The dispatcher warned me that the route through the desert was long and lonely, but I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. Besides, it was quicker than the interstate, and I wanted to get the job done fast. I started the trip just after sunset. The first few hours were peaceful. The highway was empty, and the sky was clear, filled with stars. My only company was the steady hum of the truck's engine and the occasional coyote howling in the distance. Around midnight, I noticed something strange. My CB radio started acting up. At first, it was just static, which wasn't unusual out there in the middle of nowhere. But then I heard a voice, faint and crackling through the noise. "Help. I froze. The voice was weak, almost like a whisper, but it was clear. Someone was asking for help. I grabbed the radio. "Who's there? Do you need help?" No response, just more static. I tried again, but the radio stayed silent. After a minute, I shrugged it off, figuring it was just interference or some prank. I turned up the music and kept driving, trying to push the strange moment out of my mind. About an hour later, I saw something up ahead, a pair of headlights, dim and flickering in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was an old car, parked on the side of the road. The hood was up, and the car looked like it had broken down. I slowed down as I passed, expecting to see someone waving for help, but no one was there. The car was empty. I pulled over and got out, shining my flashlight toward the car. It was a rusted, beat-up old sedan, probably from the 70s, and it didn't look like it had moved in years. The tires were flat, and there was dust and dirt caked all over it. I walked around the car, calling out to see if anyone was nearby. "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something didn't feel right. I turned to head back to my truck, but just as I reached the door, my CB radio crackled to life again. "Help. Mem." The voice was clearer this time, and I swear it sounded like it was coming from inside the car. I quickly got back in the truck and locked the doors. My heart was pounding, and I wasn't sure what to do. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, or maybe someone really was out there, lost in the desert. Either way, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I hit the gas and drove off, leaving the car behind. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A few miles later, the headlights flickered again. This time they were behind me. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and there it was, the same old car, now driving behind me, its headlights glowing faintly in the night. But there was something wrong. The car wasn't moving normally. It was jerking, swaying side to side, like it was being pulled along by some invisible force. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, trying to put as much distance between me and that car as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, the car stayed right behind me, following my every move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, they hurt. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I had to get away. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side, but the car wouldn't let up. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the car's headlights went out. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was pitch black. The car was gone. I drove for another hour without stopping, my heart still racing. I didn't hear the voice on the radio again, and I didn't see any more headlights. When I finally reached a small truck stop, I pulled over and got out, my legs shaking as I stepped onto solid ground. Inside the truck stop, I asked the clerk if he knew anything about the old car I'd seen on the road. He gave me a strange look. "Was it a beat-up old sedan?" he asked. I nodded. He shook his head, his face serious. "That car has been out there for years. They say it belonged to a family that broke down on the highway back in the 70s. They never made it to the next town. Some folks claim they see the car every now and then, just sitting there on the side of the road, or worse, following them. I felt a chill run down my spine as the clerk continued. They say the family spirits are still out there, looking for someone to help them, but no one ever does. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed a coffee and sat in my truck, staring out at the empty highway. I didn't see the car again for the rest of the trip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for the next driver to pass by. And I knew one thing for sure: I'd never take that back road again. I've been a trucker for years, and I've seen all kinds of strange things on the road. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the ghost rider. It was late, and I was driving through a long stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The sky was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. There were no street lights, no other cars, just me and the endless road. My eyes were heavy, and I could feel the exhaustion setting in, but I was determined to make it to my destination by morning. Around midnight, I noticed something in my rearview mirror, a single headlight, far behind me. It looked like a motorcycle, but it was hard to tell from that distance. I figured it was just another driver, someone else making a late-night haul. But something about the way that light stayed so far back made me uneasy. For miles, that headlight stayed exactly the same distance behind me. No matter how fast or slow I went, it didn't change. I thought it was strange, but I tried to ignore it. After a while, the road started to curve, winding through a thick forest. That's when the headlight began to get closer. Slowly, it inched toward my truck, like whoever was behind me was finally catching up. I glanced in the mirror again, and sure enough, the headlight was now just a few yards away. Then, without warning, the motorcycle pulled up right beside my truck. I looked out the window, expecting to see the rider, but what I saw froze me in my seat. The rider was wearing a black leather jacket, his face hidden by a helmet. But it wasn't the clothes or the bike that scared me. It was the fact that the rider wasn't sitting on the bike. He was hovering, just a few inches above it, his body completely still, as if he wasn't even touching the ground. I blinked, thinking I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the rider was still there, floating beside me, matching my speed perfectly. Panic set in, and I slammed my foot on the gas, trying to pull away from him. My truck roared down the highway, but the ghost rider stayed with me, never falling behind. That's when he turned his head and looked at me. Even through the helmet, I could feel his eyes on me, cold and empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to look away, but something about his stare held me in place. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the rider veered off the road and disappeared into the trees. I didn't slow down. My heart was racing, and all I wanted to do was get as far away from that spot as possible. For the next hour, I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see that headlight again, but it never came back. When I finally reached a truck stop, I pulled over, my hands shaking. I sat in the cab, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe I was just tired. But as I got out of the truck and walked toward the diner, an old man sitting outside called out to me. "See something strange out there, did ya?" I stopped and looked at him. "What do you mean?" He gave me a knowing smile. "You saw him, didn't you?" "The ghost rider." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You know about him?" The old man nodded. "Oh yeah, folks around here have been seeing him for years. They say he was a biker who died on this stretch of road decades ago. Some say he was run off the road by a trucker, and now he haunts the highway looking for revenge. He follows trucks, sometimes pulls up beside them, just like you saw." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What does he want?" The old man shrugged. "Who knows? Some say he's looking for the trucker that killed him. Others say he's just lost, stuck between this world and the next. Either way, you're lucky. He didn't take you with him." I didn't say anything. I just went inside, ordered a coffee, and sat there, thinking about what I'd seen. I couldn't shake the image of that floating rider, his eyes staring right through me. I finished my trip the next morning, but I've never taken that route again, and every time I'm out on the road late at night, I keep one eye on the mirrors, waiting for that single headlight to appear in the darkness. Because once you've seen the ghost rider, you never forget. I've been driving trucks for years, and I've seen all kinds of strange things out on the road. But this story, it still haunts me. It was late, around 1 a.m., and I was driving through a long stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no other cars, just my truck and the empty road ahead. My eyes were heavy, and all I could think about was getting to the next rest stop to grab a quick nap. As I drove, I noticed something odd up ahead. There was a truck stop, but it wasn't on my GPS. It looked like one of those old, run-down places you see in the movies, with a flickering neon sign that read, "Last Stop." The place seemed out of place, almost like it had been forgotten by time. I figured I'd stop, get some coffee, maybe stretch my legs. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed there were no other trucks, no cars, nothing. Just my rig and the empty pumps. I should have left right then and there, but I was too tired to think straight. I stepped out of the truck, and as soon as I did, the air felt different. It was cold, much colder than it should have been for that time of year. The wind was howling, but there wasn't a single tree or building for miles around. I walked up to the small diner next to the pumps. The windows were dusty, and the lights inside flickered. When I opened the door, a little bell jingled, but there was no one at the counter. The place looked old, like it hadn't been cleaned or used in years. "Hello?" I called out, but no one answered. I was about to turn around and leave when I saw an old man sitting at one of the booths in the corner. He was wearing a faded trucker's cap, staring down at a cup of coffee in front of him. His skin was pale, and he looked tired, like he'd been sitting there for days. "Need a coffee?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah, that'd be great," I replied, walking over to the counter. But there was no one behind it. "Coffee's free," the old man said. "But you should leave. This isn't a place for stopping." His words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't sure what he meant, but something about his tone made me uneasy. I poured myself a cup of coffee anyway and sat down at the counter. As I took a sip, I noticed something strange. There was a photo on the wall behind the counter. It showed a group of truckers standing in front of the diner. But what caught my eye was that one of the truckers looked exactly like the old man sitting in the corner. I turned to ask him about it, but when I looked back at the booth, he was gone. The cup of coffee he had been holding was still there, steaming as if he'd just left, but there was no sign of him. I felt a wave of panic. Something wasn't right. I stood up and quickly made my way back to my truck. The wind was picking up, and the cold air cut through my jacket like a knife. As I climbed into the cab, I glanced at the diner one last time. The lights inside were off, and the place looked completely abandoned. I didn't waste any time. I fired up the engine and peeled out of that parking lot, heading back onto the highway. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. About 10 miles down the road, I passed another trucker. His rig looked familiar. As I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was the old man's truck. His rig was covered in dust, the same faded logo on the side as in the photo from the diner. But there was no driver behind the wheel. The cab was completely empty. I sped up, wanting to get as far away from that place as possible. For the rest of the night, I didn't stop. I didn't even think about resting until I reached the next big town, hours away. The next morning, I asked some of the guys at the truck stop if they'd ever heard of the Last Stop Diner. One of them, an older guy, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've heard of it," he said. "But that place burned down 30 years ago. Some truckers say they still see it from time to time, but it's not real. They say it's haunted by the drivers who never made it back." I never took that route again, and every time I pass an old empty diner on the side of the road, I keep driving. Because some places They're not meant for the living. I've been a trucker for most of my life, and I've had some strange encounters on the road, but nothing comes close to what happened one cold, foggy night on a remote highway. I was driving a long stretch between small towns, hauling a load of goods that had to be delivered by morning. The road was quiet, no cars around, just the mist hanging in the air and the low hum of my truck's engine. It was past midnight, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. The fog got thicker as I drove, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I was focused on the road, trying to stay awake, when suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing on the side of the highway. It was a woman. She was wearing a long white dress, her hair hanging over her face. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the road. At first, I thought maybe her car had broken down or she needed help, so I slowed down as I passed her. But something wasn't right. As I got closer, I noticed she wasn't waving or signaling for help. She was just standing there. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I rolled past her, trying not to look, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her fading into the fog, but she wasn't there. The spot where she'd been standing was empty. I gripped the steering wheel tight, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I saw. There was no way I could have imagined her. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the fog playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. About a mile down the road, I saw her again. Same woman, same white dress. This time, she was standing right in the middle of the highway, staring straight at my truck. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching as I tried to stop in time. My heart was racing as the truck came to a stop just feet away from her. I looked out the windshield, but she was gone. There was no sign of her anywhere. The road was empty. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hands were shaking, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Whatever I'd seen, I needed to get away from it. I started driving again, slower this time, keeping my eyes glued to the road. The fog was thicker now, and my headlights barely cut through it. Every shadow, every shape in the mist made me jump, and then I heard it, a soft whisper, my name. I froze, gripping the steering wheel, my eyes darting around the cab. There was no one in the truck with me, but I swear, I heard my name clear as day. John. The whisper came again, louder this time, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I floored the gas, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. I didn't care about the fog or the curves in the road. I just needed to get out of there. My heart was pounding in my ears and my palms were sweaty, but I kept going. After what felt like forever, I saw the lights of a truck stop in the distance. I pulled in, shaking as I parked my rig. I stumbled out of the truck, desperate to be around other people, to feel safe. Inside the diner, I sat down at the counter, my hands still trembling. The waitress noticed and asked if I was okay. "Did you see her?" she asked, her voice low. I looked up at her, confused. "See who?" "The woman in white," she said. "Truckers see her sometimes on that stretch of road. They say she was killed in an accident there years ago, but she never left. She wanders the highway, looking for someone to take her with them." I didn't say a word. I just stared at my coffee, too shaken to speak. I never drove that route again. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled after dark, especially when you don't know what or who is waiting for you in the fog. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, and I've had my share of strange things on the road. But there's one night I'll never forget. It was a cold, rainy night, and I was driving through a long stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The rain was pouring down hard, hitting the windshield like tiny bullets, and my wipers were working overtime just to keep up. There were no other cars, no signs, nothing, just me, the dark road, and the rain. I'd been driving for hours and was getting tired. I planned to stop at the next rest area to grab some sleep, but it felt like that rest area would never come. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something up ahead. There was a man standing on the side of the road, soaking wet, with his thumb out, like he was hitchhiking. I slowed down as I got closer, feeling sorry for him. I mean, it was raining like crazy, and he didn't have an umbrella or anything. Just standing there, completely drenched. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. The man didn't say anything at first. He just nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. He was wearing an old, tattered jacket, and his face was pale, like he hadn't seen the sun in days. His clothes were soaking wet, and water dripped onto the floor of my cab. We drove in silence for a while. I tried to make small talk, asking where he was headed, but he didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, his face blank. The only sound was the rain pounding on the truck and the hum of the engine. After a few minutes, I started to feel uneasy. There was something off about this guy. The way he just sat there, not saying a word, not even looking at me, it made my skin crawl. I glanced over at him, trying to get a better look at his face, but he was just staring out the window. I started to regret picking him up. Then out of nowhere he spoke. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. I nodded, a little confused. "Yeah, I'm heading to the next town. Should be there in about an hour." He turned to me then, and for the first time I really looked at his face. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were dark, hollow, like two empty holes staring right through me. "You're going the wrong way," he whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, those empty eyes locked on mine. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I looked back at the road, trying to ignore him, but something wasn't right. The rain was getting heavier, the wind was picking up, and the road ahead seemed darker than before. I checked my GPS, but the signal was gone. The map showed nothing, just a blank screen. Panic started to set in. I glanced at the man again, but now, he wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. How could he just disappear? I jumped out of the truck, the rain pouring down on me, and looked around. There was no sign of him. No footprints, no nothing. It was like he'd never been there at all. I got back in the truck, shaking, and floored the gas. I didn't care where I was going, I just wanted to get out of there. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and all I could think about was getting away from that road. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, my heart still racing, and parked the truck. I ran inside, soaking wet, and told the guy behind the counter what had happened. He looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "You're not the first one. Truckers have been picking up a man like that for years. Some say he was a hitchhiker who died on this road in an accident a long time ago. Others say he's just a spirit, lost, trying to find his way." I didn't stay long after that. I got back in my truck and kept driving until the sun came up. I've never seen that man again, but every time I drive that stretch of road, I keep my eyes straight ahead. I'm never picking up a hitchhiker again. I've been a trucker for over a decade, and I've driven through all kinds of weather and places. I thought I'd seen it all, but one night, I came across something I can never forget. It was a quiet night, and I was driving along a deserted highway deep in the countryside. The road stretched out in front of me, disappearing into the darkness. It was the kind of night where you feel completely alone, the only light coming from your headlights. I had been driving for hours and needed a break, so when I saw a sign for a rest stop up ahead, I figured I'd pull over, stretch my legs, and maybe grab a quick nap. The rest stop looked like it hadn't been used in years. The parking lot was cracked, with weeds growing through the pavement. There were no other cars, no lights except for a flickering bulb above the restroom building. I parked my rig, stepped out, and the air was cold, colder than it should have been for that time of year. But I shrugged it off. I was tired and just wanted to rest. I decided to use the restroom before settling down. As I walked up to the small building, I noticed how old and run down it was. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the inside was just as bad. Dirty floors, cracked mirrors, and a single light bulb swinging from the ceiling. As I washed my hands, I heard the door behind me creak open. I looked up in the mirror and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, with a dirty old jacket, and his face was hidden in the shadows. "Need something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, not moving. I quickly dried my hands and headed for the door. As I walked past him, I felt his eyes on me, but he didn't say a word. Something about him made my skin crawl. I got back to my truck, locked the doors, and tried to shake off the weird encounter. I reclined in my seat, closed my eyes, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought of that man, just standing there in the doorway. After about 10 minutes, I gave up on sleeping and decided to get back on the road. But when I looked in the side mirror, my heart stopped. The man was standing in the parking lot, staring directly at my truck. He hadn't moved since I saw him in the restroom, just standing there in the middle of the lot, watching me. I started the engine, trying to ignore him, and pulled out of the rest stop as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was gone. There was no one in the parking lot. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that maybe I had imagined him. But deep down, I knew what I saw. I kept driving, my eyes glued to the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following me. About an hour later, I spotted another truck stop up ahead. This one was bigger, well lit, and full of trucks. I pulled in, parked, and went inside to grab a coffee. As I stood at the counter, I told the guy behind the register about what had happened at the last rest stop. He gave me a strange look. "You stopped there?" "Yeah, why?" I asked. He shook his head. "That rest stop's been closed for years. They shut it down after a trucker was killed there. Some say his ghost still hangs around, watching other drivers." I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't say anything else, just took my coffee and left. I've never stopped at a deserted rest stop since. Some places are better left alone.